Welcome to Identity Politics. I'm KevinDeAnna. Let's talk about one of the most annoying narratives out there. There's going to be a civil war. Either that or President Donald Trump finally drops the hammer.
Been done before.
Defeating the radical left, the Marxists, the agitators, the anarchists.
With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state.
We will liberate America from these villains once and for all.
As my first order of business, I hereby declare martial law.
You have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families.
He's a killer. A lot of killers. Get a lot of killers. Well, you think our country's so innocent?
Death penalty. Bring it forth.
The only good communist is a dead communist.
Now, look, not to get excited, the country is not going to fall apart. There will not be another war between the states. We are not going to get Gettysburg at best or Yugoslavia at worst. And people talk about national divorce. Even Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has said as much. After Charlie Kirk was assassinated, she posted, in part, "There is nothing left to talk about with the left." I agree. They hate us. I agree. They assassinated our nice guy who actually talked to them, peacefully debating ideas. I also agree. Then millions on the left celebrated and made clear they want all of us dead. To be honest, I want a peaceful national divorce. Our country is too far gone and too far divided, and it's no longer safe for any of us. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong, but it's not bloody likely. Scott Greer and others have written about why this probably won't happen anytime soon, but I'm going to give the more cynical black pill take on it right now because I know that's what you people expect. I don't think the right would fight. I don't think, regardless of how many assassinations there are, regardless of how militant they are, regardless of how outrageous the threats, they're going to tell themselves it'll all be okay. We're not going to fight. Oh, and by the way, we're also the ones who are really strong. We have all the guns. We would win anyway. Again, it's easier to pretend that you've already won, so you don't have to fight. Now, the right will vote when you have Donald Trump on the ballot, but there's no indication that they'll even turn out to vote when Trump's not on the ballot. And the farther to the right you get, the more arguments you get for abandoning mainstream politics in the fight to conquer the state. And even if we have the state right now, and that's debatable, is it possible to exercise power the way this moment demands? I've said this before. I don't think the right is capable of using the kind of graduated tactics outside the state that the left is capable of. We're very all or nothing. We don't know how to use limited amounts of force or violence. And that's not really the way it works. And that's why the left is so much more sophisticated when it comes to political technology. Now, there is one argument for why we could conceivably see something. When you have different levels of a government arguing about who has the right to use armed force, that's when things traditionally kick off. To some extent, you have that right now with federal officials and troops conflicting with local authorities. I mean, if you think of English Civil War, what caused it? A lot of things. But the thing that really got it going was Parliament and the Crown fighting over who has the right to raise and command troops. Sort of similar to what we have going now. And to some extent, if you take what's happening now to its logical conclusion, I think that's the only way forward. I think that's the only way we win and save the entire country. Like, we have to have this out. We have to have this argument. We have to have this fight. This is the only way we can save the entire thing, if that's possible. And that's an open question. So what do? You use the state, you prompt the left-wing uprising, you then crush them, and you reconstruct. And this is, in some respect, what is federal policy right now. This is kind of what is being done. But is anything going to come of it, or are we just making things worse here? Look, first, to get one thing out of the way, yes. Obviously, the federal government can use federal troops to enforce national law on recalcitrant states and localities. That's not even up for debate. I know such and such a judge says, oh, that's not allowed, we're not authoritarian. Yeah, that's just because they don't like the purposes for which it's being used. If you had President Kamala Harris, they would not only improve it, they'd mandate it. After all, think about it. Why do you have to live where you do? Commute a long way to work so you don't have to send your kids to public schools. Why were public schools destroyed in this country? Because the Supreme Court, quite conscious that they were simply making up laws and not interpreting it, and that's a story for another episode, said desegregation was mandatory. And a whole series of presidents, from Eisenhower to Kennedy to Johnson, used federal troops on American citizens to force integration. I want you to really look at these photos right here. Bayonets on, guns pointed at citizens, ready to fire. This was Clinton, Tennessee, I think. This is the National Guard. But then, of course, you had the 101st Airborne famously pointing its bayonets at teenagers in Little Rock, Arkansas, just to make sure that the school system there was completely destroyed. So there you have federal troops being used directly on American citizens. Now, one of the great mysteries, if you're reading about this stuff after the fact, if you've already moved past all the stupid arguments about how evil it was that we once had white functional schools, is how did people put up with this? I mean, you had this whole thing called massive resistance in the South. Virginia went so far as to abolish its public school system, which is kind of funny. And they didn't make arguments based purely on race. If you read a lot of this stuff, a lot of the things that the so-called segregationists were saying sounds a lot like the arguments you hear now from the left. The federal government is using its military on American citizens. This is unconstitutional. This is a military dictatorship. This is a violation of states' rights. The states are sovereign. Maybe I agree with the end of integration, or in other words, maybe I agree with enforcing immigration laws, but we have to make sure it's done the right way. We need to trust in the law. We have to trust in this, that, the other thing. And all of these people were just made complete fools because nobody in the courts, the so-called guardians of the law, nobody in the courts cared about any of this stuff. Nobody. And nobody ever did. Just like today, the same journalists who would scream and wail if protesters were confronted by police also wanted bayonets drawn to march white kids to schools so they could be unsafe forever. It's about means. It's not about ends. And now we are told that things like states' rights and state sovereignty and federalism actually matter. From the people you would never expect. So here's Hillary Clinton. If states' rights mean anything, they must include the right to not get invaded by another state in peacetime. Americans everywhere speak up and stand against Trump's outrageous assaults on Illinois and Oregon. J.D. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, there is no reason a president should send military troops into a sovereign state without their knowledge, consent, or cooperation. Oh, the states are sovereign now, are they? That's remarkable. The president can't send troops from other states to protect federal assets, to enforce federal law, to make sure there's compliance with federal writ. We can't do that anymore. Isn't that interesting? Man, here in Virginia, we'd be in a very different situation if we had only realized that that's apparently how it works this entire time. I'd go so far as to say we'd had it made. Because here's what the president is doing. You can't argue with his deploying federal assets to the District of Columbia, which he's already done. It's a federal district, does not have the right of self-government. No one disputes this, and by all accounts, it's doing the job as far as reducing crime. In fact, the Washington Post recently reported that some rank-and-file officers and detectives have complained for months, in some cases years, that managers were recording serious crimes as more minor ones to make their police districts appear safer or avoid the ire of top department brass. Some kept lists documenting cases where they believed a higher-up improperly classified a crime as a lower offense. One such tally, obtained by the Washington Post, lists more than 150 instances since March of 2024, where staff in a Southeast D.C., God help them, Southeast D.C., police district believes offenses were, at least initially, inappropriately classified. Of course, if you live in D.C., or if you ever lived in D.C., you know the Southeast is especially bad, Anacostia. And not surprisingly, that's where they want to cover everything up. On a previous episode, we talked about President Trump sending people to Memphis, Tennessee. Now, you got a red state. Cities have little capability to govern themselves. I mean, let me rephrase that. These cities can't govern themselves at all, and they probably shouldn't be allowed to. But I mean, under the law, they can't even theoretically do it. They don't really have autonomy.
Let me show you Korean beauty trick.
So even the mayor in Memphis, Black Run City, has to grin and bear it. He says he's not happy, but there's nothing he can do about it. The governor's against him. The governor's with the president. But Portland, Oregon, Chicago, Illinois, it's a different story. First of all, Portland. This has to be regarded as the Antifa capital of the United States. You have repeated attacks on a federal installation, attacks on conservatives. Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, went to Portland yesterday and had, by what was all accounts, a fairly contentious meeting with Portland police. And she left basically saying, look, we're going to send even more people. And as of a few days ago, you had 28 people arrested, but there's more happening just about every night. There's probably more happening as you're watching this right now. USA Today reports, the arrests have been made amid protests outside the ICE field office in South Portland to oppose Trump's mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. Though largely peaceful, I'm sure, in some cases, the protests have included clashes with law enforcement and the use of tear gas, unquote. Now, you can tell from the language there, undocumented immigrants, Trump's effort to deport, blah, blah, blah. The euphemisms, they're trying to disguise what's happening. They're journalists. Their job is to lie to you. Their job is to make it confusing. It's been more than that. They've tried to vandalize the headquarters. They've attacked officers. You've had scuffles with conservatives that have now been showing up to cover the protests and to counter-protest the protesters. We've covered some of the attacks before, attacks with flagpoles, the scuffles, this thing the Antifa do, if you've ever dealt with them, where they keep walking into you or getting in your way, even if you're trying to leave, but they don't quite swing at you. So there's still the plausible deniability about who started it, this whole thing. It's a very passive-aggressive way to fight, but this is what they do because they know they have the law and they have the police to some extent on their side. Stuff like this. Take a look.
Fuck out of here, white boy. I'm walking down the street. You ain't going nowhere. Get out of here. I'll fuck your ass up. I will fuck your ass up, punk. Get out of here. Get out of here now. You're gonna get fucking paid. Don't fucking touch me. Get it, bitch.
Nice rainbow colors. I like your rainbow.
Oh, the police on the side of Antifa? That's crazy. Okay, well, Nick Sotor, the guy in this video, actually got arrested himself by Portland police. Same police who have been refusing to arrest Antifa on assault charges. But he got PR, conservatives spoke up, Nick is not going to be facing charges. But still, he did get arrested, which tells you something about the facts on the ground. Now, President Trump has been saying, Portland's war-torn, and, there's garbage flaming in the streets, and everybody's attacking each other, and leftists are going there and saying, appearing in a park and being like, it's actually very peaceful here. I'm surviving in this war zone. Trump is so stupid. Leftists have been dunking on him over and over again, saying it's not a war zone or anything like that, but both sides are missing the point here. You have organized left-wing radical networks that are deliberately trying to make it impossible for federal immigration agents to do their job. You have local government hostile, not backing up federal law enforcement, clearly biased on ideology when it comes to policing. So what do? The federal government intervenes because really what they're doing is reasserting federal control. Is Portland part of the country or not? And it's also simply not true that ordinary people are not paying the price for the status quo. Normal business owners suffer from repeated break-ins, political intimidation from radicals. No one in the city government cares. Why? Because those people are the political allies of the establishment. Fox News recently reported that ordinary business owners, including one who has suffered 10 break-ins recently, are strongly in favor of the president using federal troops. And why shouldn't they be? The whole point of government is to protect property, and the local government is saying, we're just not going to do that because we think Trump is icky. And again, there are people, even people on our side, maybe people especially on our side, who are going to say, the federal government shouldn't be doing that, the Constitution, and this is terrible. Okay, fine. But the federal government already does that. And no one's upset about it. And no one's complained about it until now. The 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act was signed by President Bill Clinton. This is that law that everybody complains about when they start talking about mass incarceration of black super predators and all that stuff. But one of the other things that it did was it gave the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division the ability to investigate local police departments. And what have we talked about when it comes to civil rights and the way you have to analyze official behavior? Disparate impact. If you are arresting too many blacks, if you have too many whites in command, if you have reports that somebody said a mean word, if you have institutional racism or whatever other fuzzy things that you can't prove or disprove and you just have to take on faith, you can then say that the federal government essentially has the right to supervise the way these police departments are run. They do this through something called consent decrees. There have been about 70 of these investigations, about 20 led to consent decrees, including many major cities that you've heard of, but also critically, Ferguson, Missouri. What happened in Ferguson, Missouri? You probably remember the Michael Brown killing. That was the start of Black Lives Matter. And even though the Obama DOJ concluded that all the myths from that time, hands up, don't shoot, all the rest of that nonsense, even though that didn't happen, they still said that the police department needed a consent decree to make sure you're not pulling over too many black people or this kind of thing. Now, Ferguson is still a dump. In fact, the guy who essentially created the hands up, don't shoot myth was a man named Dorian Johnson. He's the one who said that this happened. He just got shot and killed a month ago, age 33. But no political importance. Nobody cares, except that all that time ago, he saw Michael Brown get shot and told the story, which then the Obama DOJ didn't even go along with. Violent crime was up in this city in 2024 compared to 2023, but who cares? The federal government is enforcing bias-free policing, and that's what matters. And what is bias-free policing? Basically no policing at all, because if you're actually policing, you're going to arrest a lot of black people because they commit the crime. And so therefore, we're just not going to do it. Now, the Trump administration has been rolling these back, canceled some consent decrees that were about to take effect. Thing is, they might still get implemented locally because these are ways for activists and NGOs to get money and power, essentially supervising the police. That's the way American society works at this point, unfortunately. But what matters to us here is that when people start saying, oh, the federal government can't be telling local police departments what they can and cannot do. Yes, it can. They've been doing it. And the very same people who are telling you that they're not allowed to do it have been supporting it all along. It's already been happening. The same people who are mad that the federal government wants to stop actual crime thinks that the federal government, in alliance with whatever community activists crawl out from under a rock, get to tell local police to do bias-free policing. So don't tell me about how the federal government can't be doing these things to local law enforcement. They already do, and nobody cared. I think in Chicago, we're going to see a situation that's even more serious than Portland. So who's the mayor of Chicago? Brandon Johnson, black guy. Up until a month ago, probably the most unpopular politician in America. It's actually remarkable when you're looking at polls for him. I saw polls, the most favorable one I saw as far as his approval rating was 26%. I saw another one was at 6%. That takes some doing to be supported by only 6% of the people. But now, he sees taking on President Donald Trump in the name of defending Chicago from, I don't know, reduction in the homicide rate, I guess. That's his key to popularity. And here's the thing, he might be right. I mean, listen to the way he talks about that kind of stuff. Listen.
Today, we are signing an executive order aimed at reining in this out-of-control administration. The order is
2 months ago, my husband ditched Viagra and Tadalafil. I thought it would be just another quick night. But my husband
establishes ice-free zones. That means that city property and unwilling private businesses will no longer serve as staging grounds for these raids.
This is from the Chicago Sun-Times, and I quote, "City property, including parking lots next to Chicago public schools, libraries, parks, and city buildings, cannot be used as staging grounds for raids by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents under an executive order signed Monday aimed at what Mayor Brandon Johnson called President Donald Trump's forceful display of tyranny. It's the latest of 3 executive orders that Johnson has signed in what so far has been a failed attempt to stop or slow the deportation campaign that has sowed fear and chaos in the Chicago area and at times triggered clashes between protesters and ICE agents in the city and suburbs. Over the weekend, Trump ordered hundreds of National Guard troops, including 300 from Illinois and 400 from Texas, to assist in his deportation campaign in Chicago and other cities. Illinois and Chicago responded Monday with a lawsuit aimed at blocking what Governor J.B. Pritzker called the Trump invasion. The lawsuit follows a ruling Sunday night by a federal judge in Oregon barring Trump from deploying federalized members of any National Guard under the president's command to that state. Of course, because random federal judges get to be commander-in-chief now. That's the way our system works. That's what the founders intended. Johnson's latest executive order prohibits city-owned and city-controlled parking lots, garages, and vacant lots from being used as staging areas or operations bases for civil immigrant enforcement activities, including surveillance or logistical coordination, unquote. Now, here's the key. We've already had some violent confrontations. DHS was reportedly boxed in and rammed by vehicles. One woman was shot. The woman and the man are facing charges, but, of course, they're already out on bond. Female judge decided, let him go.
Cameras were rolling as the woman shot by federal agents was released from federal custody. Charlie just mentioned 30-year-old Marima Martinez, who is accused of ramming her car into agents. Here you see her leaving the federal detention center downtown this evening. A short time later, 21-year-old Anthony Ian Santos Ruiz was also released. According to the criminal complaint, Martinez and Ruiz forcibly assaulted, resisted, opposed, impeded, intimidated, and interfered with an officer.
Also in Chicago, according to leaked audio, police were ordered to stand down and not assist ICE officers who were boxed in and menaced by protesters. The New York Post reports Chicago police officers en route to help federal agents who were being surrounded and menaced by an angry mob of ICE protesters were seemingly ordered by their chief of patrol to stand down and not provide assistance, stunning dispatch audio and internal messages reveal. The group of agents was conducting a routine patrol on the city's south side on Saturday when they were attacked and rammed by vehicles and boxed in by 10 cars, the Department of Homeland Security said. A bit later in this article, we learn local cops were initially prepared to help the agents, but were ordered to stand down by the chief of patrol, according to shocking dispatch audio transmissions. Younger male Hispanic wearing all black wanted for the hit and run. This guy fled from the scene. A female dispatcher blares in response to a call for help from the surrounded ICE agents, or audio showed by X Alerts. When the offending vehicle crashed, they ran the federal agent off the road. They fled on foot westbound. A male voice then comes on the radio channel, telling the dispatcher to direct officers to head to the scene and stay put a few blocks away and await further instruction, which she relays. A few seconds later, the male voice is heard again saying tersely, per the chief of patrol, clear everybody out. We're not responding over there. The female dispatcher then tells officers on the way to the distress call, per the chief of patrol, all units clear out from there. We're not sending anybody out to that location. Now again, this is not long after we just had that shooting at an ICE facility where the idiot leftist managed to kill some detainees instead of agents, but given that he was opening up on a van, it's pretty clear what his target was. And given all of this, get this report from local news. This is from the ABC affiliate in Chicago, ABC 7. Anarchists are not only publishing detailed breakdowns of ICE facilities, but doxing individual agents. Watch.
New bulletins from the Center for Internet Security and Department of Homeland Security stating ICE agents and facilities have been targeted by an anarchist website in Chicago. The law enforcement threat assessment from the Center for Internet Security says at least 4 Chicago area ICE facilities, including Broadview, have been surveilled with detailed layouts, diagrams, and photos posted to what is described as an anarchist website. Also found on the website, reviewed by the ABC 7i team, photos of ICE agents, including names, faces, and badge numbers.
There has been an increase in the attempt to gather information online and publish it even on websites publicly available.
A separate Department of Homeland Security Joint Intelligence Bulletin from this month advises ICE facilities and personnel face an increased threat from domestic violent extremists, similar to the 2 shootings at ICE facilities in Texas in September and July.
These are law enforcement operations, and these are law enforcement officers that are doing what they were sworn to do.
ABC 7 police affairs consultant Bill Kushner says the enhanced federal action in Chicago brings enhanced risk to immigration operations.
The more people resist this in a violent fashion, the more violence is going to be used to defend the officer.
Now, why does this matter? Aside from it being an obvious ploy to get these people attacked, remember that California Governor Gavin Newsom and others have been saying, we need to force these agents to not wear masks. Well, what is the obvious consequence of that? What is the purpose of that? It's to get these people attacked. It's to get these people killed. And yes, the threats are real. So, Latin Kings member, 37-year-old Mexican living in the United States, allegedly, I have to say, but he shouldn't even be here. None of these people should even be here. 37-year-old gang member living in the United States posted a hit on Border Patrol Chief Gregory. He said, in Spanish, $10,000 if you take him down. Newsweek reports, DHS officials say immigration agents have observed a rise in assaults since January, when the Trump administration began implementing its immigration policies. The department attributes some of the attacks to protests against ICE operations and has blamed Democrats and progressive activists. The surge in incidents comes as the administration ramps up efforts to remove millions of migrants living in the country without legal authorization. Depraved individuals like Juan Esperanza Martinez, who do not value human life and threaten law enforcement, do not belong in this country. We will not allow criminal gangs to put hits on U.S. government officials and our law enforcement officers, DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said in a statement shared with Newsweek. Martinez has been charged in federal court with soliciting the murder of a senior law enforcement official. The DOJ is prosecuting the case. Bovino, the Border Patrol agent who led the immigration enforcement efforts that sparked widespread protests in Los Angeles, is leading operations in Chicago. He serves as commander-at-large of the U.S. Border Patrol and has maintained a visible presence as he looks to implement the Trump administration's deportation plans. This is all while the governor of Illinois is calling them thugs. This is why practically every Democratic politician in the country is calling them Nazis, saying this is fascism, this is whatever else. But really, all of this boils down to one simple question. It's not just, oh, political violence, we need to turn down the temperature. No one's going to do that. So the real question is this. Does the United States still exist in any real meaningful form? Because does the federal government have the right and the authority and the ability to enforce existing immigration law in what used to be considered our major cities? Or are these areas just not part of the country anymore? Now, J.D. Pritzker says the only reason there's chaos in Chicago is because of the feds. This isn't a city where they can't go a weekend without a few dozen people being shot. Not that many die, but that's because these people can't shoot. But never mind that. Let's get to the substantial point. Because not the governor, not the mayor, not the press, not the people culling each other merrily over a pair of shoes or whatever it is they do, none of those people care about shooting each other, but they care about ICE being there. What does that tell you about what they truly value? J.D. Pritzker says, well, remember, the Insurrection Act has the name insurrection in it for a reason. It's only something that you can effectuate if there's an insurrection, a foreign invasion, a true national emergency. That doesn't exist here, and it doesn't exist in Portland.
Grab your AR and get in, soldier. I need you to sight in your weapon. No noise, no wasted ammo. You've got 10 seconds.
Portland. It didn't exist in Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles. So I realized President Trump, who does no reading and doesn't understand anything, uses the words Insurrection Act like he understands it. Well, let's talk facts to this fat subversive here. Insurrection, foreign invasion, a true national emergency. These are not all the same things. Maybe he knows that. Maybe he doesn't. That's not really the issue. The issue is this. Does the governor of a state that is still nominally part of the United States intend to resist the federal government's right to enforce immigration laws for the whole country? Because if the answer is yes, that is much worse than an insurrection. That's much worse than a foreign invasion. That justifies far more militant tactics than any national emergency. It's a far more serious threat than the South just seceding. The South just wanted to be left alone. The legitimate state governments wanted to take charge. Here you have local authorities intervening on behalf of foreigners to make sure the national government can't enforce the law. That's not resisting federal authority. That's taking the side of a foreign invasion that has already occurred. And there's a word for that. It's treason. It's a very common word. There's nothing special about it. I note in passing, there's a new edition of one of the most important, I don't want to hyperbole here, but it is the most important and prophetic book of the last half decade, or the last half century, I should say. The book that, if we don't win, is going to be the epitaph of our civilization, and that's Jean Ruspel's The Camp of the Saints. If you haven't read it, you need to read it immediately. You can find it at Vauban Books. This is the new edition. But the reason I mention this is there's an excerpt here that really captures the problem we're dealing with right now, really describes men like the governor of Illinois. And I quote, "You know," the consul went on, "there's a very old word that describes the kind of men you are. It's traitor. That's all. You're nothing new. There have been all kinds. We've had bishop traders, knight traders, general traders, statesman traders, scholar traders, and just plain traders. It's a species the West abounds in, and it seems to get richer and richer the smaller it grows. Funny, you should think it should be the other way around, but the mind decays, the spirit warps, and the traders keep coming. And this is the critical thing we need to understand here. One of the big problems we're dealing with right now is we have a system where regardless of who nominally is in power, you have this machinery that makes it impossible to solve the problem. There's sort of this meme going around now of the fix everything switch. And, oh, you don't flip that switch. You can't just solve the problems. We could solve the problems. There's not a single problem this country faces which couldn't be solved more or less instantly. But the problem is you have to go through like 20 different cases to deport one illegal. The other side has unlimited legal representation. You have nothing. They have a permanent government bureaucracy on your side. You have nothing. The Constitution protects them. It does not protect you. There's this whole system of analysis that explains how this works. And, you know, again, in my core, I'm basically just a political science and IR nerd. If we had a real country, I'd be in academia or something. But academia doesn't really exist anymore as a serious place. But back when it used to, one of the traditions of analysis that exists is this idea of institutionalism. It's the functions of bureaucracies, it's the cost-benefit analysis within that determine policy outcomes. It determines what you can do. It determines how politics works in a country. And to some extent, that's true, because regardless of the system of government that any Western country is in, regardless of what the elected leaders want to do, nobody can seem to get rid of these people because all these new obstacles magically emerge at the last minute. We had a guest on here not long ago who talked about this. Remember in Sweden, with the Sweden Democrats, you have a European nationalist government. They want to get these people out. Sorry, that's not allowed. Magical rules, non-elected people determine who gets to stay, who gets to go, because that's actually how democracy works. Remember, Matteo Salvini in Italy, he was interior minister. He was indicted for kidnapping, for trying to remove illegals. That's your rule of law right there. But I think that actually understates it. It's not just institutions. I mean, the show is identity politics, right? I don't think it's just a question of cost-benefit analysis or something as boring and colorless as that. It's something more primal and raw. It's about blood. Real politics is about ends, not means. And one of the things you will see on the online right now is that the side that wants to win will always defeat the side that wants to be left alone. People at least say this now, and it's true. And it's a sign of growth that we're saying that. But I'd add something else. The side that is concerned with ends will always defeat the side that is concerned with means. It is no exaggeration to say that a major reason the American right, really the entire Anglo right, is so feckless and failed is because we're obsessed with institutions and moving around the machinery of state. Oh, we have to handle problems at this level or that level. Who cares? It's about what is done. The form power takes is less important than power itself. I mean, Victor, take an example, and this is somebody who really should know better, somebody who's written a lot on the immigration issue over the years. Victor Davis Hanson, one of the rare conservative writers who has something of a reputation within academia. You've probably heard of him if you're into history books. He has some popular reputation. He posts this thing, and it's completely idiotic. And I quote, "Both Antifa and the appeasing organ officials are our new neo-Confederate secessionists. They feel that their states are now autonomous entities that are still entitled to federal money, but not obligated to follow federal laws." He calls this reactionary neo-Confederate Portland. This is some uniquely conservatism Inc. and boomer psychosis right here. And they always do this. They always think it's some masterful political strategy to say, actually, you guys are the real far right. You guys are the real fascists. The Antifa are like the Confederates. That means I win because I called you the racist. I used political jujitsu. I get to win now. Portland is actually reactionary. I'm the liberal. But it's the same thing as when they say, oh, you guys are actually fascists. You guys are actually Nazis. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. None of this is true. You sound stupid when you say it. You know why? Because it's a self-evidently stupid thing to say. And more than that, cut to the core of politics. Cut all the nonsense. What do people think about the Civil War now? The Union boosters and the people who post General Sherman memes, why do they think it was so great? Same reason they're taught to believe that what John Brown did was good. It is good to kill white Southerners who supported slavery because that is what their culture was all about. And incidentally, all white people are kind of like that. Why was fascism or Nazism bad? It has nothing to do with the theory of the state. It has nothing even really to do with conquering other countries or imperialism or empires or something like that, because nobody cares that the Soviet Union occupied all those Eastern European countries, not least Poland, that the UK destroyed itself to save. The reason we're supposed to be opposed to fascism or Nazism is because they're linked with white supremacy and racism. That's what people care about. If current trends continue, and you get to the point where the old conspiracy theory that everybody kind of admits is actually real, that the Southwest may eventually just return to Mexico because of demographics, let's pretend something like that actually happens, you get Aztlan or whatever they call it. Do you think any of the people who get worked up about calling Southern leaders traitors, post to General Sherman memes and all the rest, do it again, burn Atlanta, do you think any of those people would think it's justified to say, burn LA to the ground? Put all the leaders of California on trial for treason. Start massacring everyone who dared defy the United States. No. None of them would support that. In fact, they would support that kind of secession because the issue is not the Union. It's not secession. It's not local autonomy. It's race. It's tribe. It's identity. The same people who hate this country, who hate its entire history, turn into flag-waving super patriots for 2 points in time. 1861 to 1865, 1941 to 1945, because then you get to wrap yourself in the American flag to do what your politics are entirely focused on, which is kill your racial enemies, which are white people. That's it. Now, this show is about white identity politics, but I will admit that we are not so monolithically focused on race 24/7 the same way a non-white normie is. This is all they think about. They really do hate you this much. This is all their politics is focused on. It's no deeper than this. And it has real policy consequences. Why?
All right, what do you want to know? Old school RuneScape. It's probably easier if I just show you. So, yeah, camera guy? Yeah.
Let's have a look. Wait, millions of people play this game. Well, I guess it looks aesthetically pleasing. Wait, how many quests are there? That can't be true. Oh my god, there's over 20 skills that you've got to get to level 99. That's like thousands of hours of gameplay. How do we get the live cake? You don't mind if I hang on to this, do you? You don't mind? I'm just gonna continue playing this.
Does the federal government face resistance to enforcing national law? Because non-whites think they have a race-based exemption to laws they don't like. And there's enough of them there that local authorities are going to go along with that. Unfortunately, there's enough traitors in this country to go along with that kind of a program. So what are we doing here? Because we're on the brink of losing the whole thing. It's not really about the Insurrection Act. It's not really about President Trump's authority. We're past that in some ways. I mean, think of what the Insurrection Act really is. This is what President Trump is threatening to invoke to send more troops in. It was last used during the LA riots in 1992. This is something I doubt local politicians would even try to stop now. They would not send in the Marines if you had something on the scale of the LA riots. They'd apologize. They'd try to support it. They might say that the violence is justified. They would just let it burn. I mean, after all, we basically saw that in 2020 in a number of cities, not least Minneapolis. Consider what the Insurrection Act actually says, too. It's very black and white. This is from the law. Whatever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages, or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state, by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state, and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion. And another section says the president, by using the militia or the armed forces or both, shall take such measures as he considers necessary to suppress in a state any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy if it hinders the execution of the laws of that state and of the United States within the state, or if it opposes or obstructs the execution of the laws of the United States or impedes the course of justice under those laws. That is extremely clear. It is not up for debate. It is extremely obvious that obstructing the enforcement of immigration law within a state is an insurrection under this law. There's nothing to debate here. Any judge who says, well, it actually, no, they know they're lying. They just don't want it to happen. It really is that simple, as most problems actually are. None of this would even be controversial long ago. But it's not about the law. It's not about what words mean. It's about race. Because if you are sending troops into these areas, federal agents into these areas, enforcing immigration law, you're telling non-whites that they can't just do whatever they want to do. And whatever the law says, that vague spirit, somewhat captured in things like the Civil Rights Act, that minorities can just do whatever they want because they're not white and the law doesn't apply to them, that's the real Constitution of the United States now. The law itself isn't even a thing. That vague idea, that's the thing that has moral force. It's not the law, it's not the country, sure as hell it's not the Constitution. So what happens? Well, President Trump has in some ways painted himself into a corner because he's going to look weak if he does nothing. These judges who apparently think themselves commander-in-chief keep blocking him, preventing him from deploying troops. President Trump keeps obeying them. And it's very easy to say, oh, what a cuck, how could he do this? But, and let's take a step back here. Would most people support him if he openly defied the courts? People do not like honest political communication. They want things couched in euphemism. They want hypocrisy. They want to live with their illusions. This is just the reality, guys. Would people support him if Donald Trump went full Andrew Jackson? We're probably not there yet. But maybe not by him, maybe by him. At some point, this has to happen, or we lose the whole thing. Now, my pessimism on this, and I've felt this about this exact situation for a very long time, has been reflected by two people who have usually pretty different readings on the situation, Nick Fuentes, Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin is basically the original neo-reactionary. He's been writing for a long time. If you've been in the sphere, you've heard of him. Very much come into prominence with the new administration to the point that he's being called the court intellectual. I think that's overstated, not least because of his doomerism about what is likely to happen. This is from his latest article on Substack. He wrote, "The second Trump revolution, like the first, is failing. It is failing because it deserves to fail. It is failing because it spends all its time patting itself on the back. It is failing because its true mission, which neither it nor, still less, its supporters understand, is still as far beyond its reach as algebra is beyond a cat. Because the vengeance meted out after its failure will dwarf the vengeance after 2020. Because the successes of the second revolution are so much greater than the first, everyone involved with this revolution needs a plan B for 2029. And it is not even clear that it can wait until 2029. Losing the Congress will instantly put the administration on the defensive." In other words, here's the problem with the Trump administration. It's appealing to public opinion, which is losing anyway. It's posting cool images of ICE agents coming out of helicopters, rounding up people, whatever else, but it's not really exercising power. It's not really reclaiming sovereignty. It's not consolidating authority. And when the left comes back, which does know how to use power, you're not going to be dealing with any of these restraints that magically emerge when President Trump is in the White House. You are not going to see judges being like, actually, the government's not allowed to do that. You're not going to see reporters complaining about authoritarianism or unlimited federal control or a military dictatorship. You're not going to see any of these activists doing anything except supporting everything that happens. Now, the example that Yarvin gives here is Stephen Miller basically saying that the American Democratic Party is essentially a terrorist organization shielding criminals. I mean, this is what he says. "The issue before us now is very simple and clear. There is a large and growing movement of left-wing terrorism in the country. It is well organized and funded, and it is shielded by far-left Democrat judges, prosecutors, and attorneys general. The only remedy is to use legitimate state power to dismantle terrorism and terror networks." I agree. I agree totally. What does Ian Bremmer say? He makes the obvious retort. If you really believe that, don't all these people need to be removed? And if you do that, doesn't this make it a one-party state? It's a fair point. What have we always said about conservative rhetoric? If you make these kinds of claims, the retort is, and therefore what? If you actually believe this, how can you not justify going all the way? But of course, they're not going to go all the way. So where does that leave us? Now, of course, the leftist case on this is completely hypocritical. Not that there's a problem in politics, But if you listen to any mainstream reporter, academic, activist, what are they going to say? They're going to say the biggest problem with American history is that we didn't reconstruct the South hard enough after the Civil War. The Reconstruction wasn't brutal enough, that we didn't hang enough Confederates. And what's the biggest problem now? We didn't ban Trump from running again. We didn't throw him in jail. We didn't just treat him the way Brazil did to Bolsonaro. And this is what they are going to act on if they get the chance. I think it is very obvious we are going to get some kind of a one-party state very soon. It's just a question of whose party. And it won't be formal. It won't be, oh, there's only one party allowed or something like that. You'll have plausible deniability. It's going to look like South Africa in terms of how the system functions. The right does not have the will to do these things because we are still tinkering with power. We're still tinkering around the edges with the system. And tinkering around the edges with the system is actually more risky, less effective than going for the whole thing. It seems like the coward's way out, but it's actually the more reckless thing to do. I mean, Yarvin writes, look, politics is fundamentally about power. In power, large things are easier than small things. Getting rid of all the liberal judges is easier than getting rid of one liberal judge. Getting rid of all the judges is easier than getting rid of all the liberal judges. Getting rid of the whole legal system is easier than getting rid of all the judges. Getting rid of the whole machine of government is easier than getting rid of the whole legal system. Getting rid of the whole philosophy of government is easier than getting rid of the whole machine of government. This is exactly right. We are waiting for Caesar here, and Trump is not Caesar. And maybe that may sound like LARPing. Maybe it is LARPing, but it's less of a LARP than to pretend that through the existing system, we can just get rid of the affirmative action judges or remove all the legals.
Mom had Alzheimer's at 78, but today, at 82, she solves crossword puzzles better than me thanks to a spice hidden in the kitchen.
Or punish all the traitors. Now, that doesn't mean we can afford to just ignore the system or ignore mainstream politics. Caesar himself had a role within the system before he transformed it. You don't get to do nothing. You don't get to not engage in politics. You don't get to just kind of throw rhetorical bombs from the sidelines and then you magically inherit power one day. But this is going to be a lot harder than just winning one election.
Our beloved republic is in the hands of madmen. This is a dark day, and I stand at a fork in the road. I can abide the law and surrender my arms to the Senate and watch the republic fall to tyranny and chaos. Or I can go home with my sword in my hand and run those maniacs to the Tarpeian Rock!
But look, Donald Trump is not going to do that. We can meme it, but he's not going to do it. And he can in some ways. He's not a military guy. He's too old. He just doesn't have that kind of character. But it's not even really about Trump. And I'm less inclined to blame him or say, oh, he's a failure. He doesn't have the will. It's not that. He was brought up in a system that didn't function that way. And more importantly, the people now are not ready for it. His people are not even ready for it. Conservatives are not ready for it. I mean, you got to remember, Trump is too scary for normal Republicans. Normal Republicans are out there talking about how we need a bipartisan amnesty on immigration. That's what the leading Senate candidate in Kentucky, deep red state, is talking about. We need to compromise on immigration now. They think Trump is too much. You think they're ready for Caesar? I mean, we have to be realistic here. Nick Fuentes, more or less agreeing with Curtis Yarvin here, says that Trump or someone in the Trump government appears to be deliberately manufacturing a state of tension. And what he means by that is you have federal law enforcement going out there, forcing confrontation with leftists, and then you try to escalate the stakes of these conflicts, and then at one point you're going to be able to crack down. But are they actually going to do that? Nick says, probably not. And he says, and I quote, I fear that the Trump administration lacks the will and follow through to do what is necessary to win a true confrontation with the left. If that is the case, then all they are doing is antagonizing the left and creating a tension which will just explode rather than lead to a pretext for a right-wing power grab, in which case I agree with Curtis Yarvin that this Trump administration is doing nothing other than inciting the left to destroy us when they return to power. That is the danger. Now, again, I don't think this is calculated or controlled. I don't think Trump is controlled and he's doing this because he's in on it or something like that. I think that most of the Trump administration, especially the Attorney General, just doesn't know what time it is. A couple people do within it. Miller, I think, does, but most of the others don't. And even Miller may have too much faith in public opinion. But if I can offer any optimism, I think this is a step we have to go through. I think Trump had to win, and we have to go through what we're going through right now. Consider where the right is now compared to a decade ago. Consider where we have to be in order to do what's necessary. What I think is critical to understand as we prepare the way for the age of Caesars, the age of absolute politics, is you need to remain focused on ends, not means, on what is to be done, not the level of bureaucracy that handles problems, on who, not what. The other side views politics that way, and that's why they win. You know, the obvious question with a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is there any hope? I mean, can we point to a single place where they actually did the things that I'm talking about here, where they actually took an existing system and turned it into a better system? And the obvious answer is yeah. I mean, El Salvador, right? I mean, this is a country that we used to make fun of as almost the personification of dysfunctional government, of what America could turn into if we didn't stop illegal immigration. Now, I would love to turn into El Salvador. That's like the best case scenario. And President Bukele has basically been taunting us on Maine, on X, saying, why don't you just do what I did? So, for example, he says, when we impeached our country's corrupt judges, we faced strong backlash from the so-called international community, including the Biden administration. We did it anyway, because it was the only way to save our country. The U.S., however, doesn't have to answer to anyone. In other words, no one's going to put sanctions on you. Why don't you just do it? And he identifies a key point here that when people talk about our democracy or the way democracy is supposed to work or liberal democracy, they don't mean popular sovereignty. They don't mean the will of the people. What they mean are institutions that conceal authority. And the best way you can do that is transnational bureaucracies and judges and so-called experts. Because if you disagree with what they say, there's nothing you can actually do about it. There's no real way to hold them accountable. What do you have to do? You have to just get rid of them. You can't let these people wield authority. I mean, another thing Bukele once said that I really love, power is either going to be wielded by merchants or by kings. Another thing he said, if you don't impeach the corrupt judges, you cannot fix the country. They will form a cartel, a judicial dictatorship, and block all reforms, protecting the systemic corruption that put them in their seats. A few years ago, Viter.com was writing about this in regard to various rulings. And there's a term, it actually comes from the Bible. I think it's called a kritarchy, which is basically rule by judges. Apparently, ancient Israel had a form of government like this for a while. And we use that term, and it was one of those things where the mainstream press found out about it, and they called the very term anti-Semitic. But whether it is or not, this is basically how we are run. I mean, if you wanted to point to where is the most powerful policymaking body in the United States today, and really throughout the whole West, it tends to be the judiciary. And it's because the people who designed our systems intended it to be the least powerful. That's precisely why it's the most powerful. And I think they fundamentally didn't understand, they didn't anticipate that their descendants would be so weak, that they would just take orders from foreigners and from hysterical liberal women and whoever else, just lying down and just say, well, they made a rule. There's nothing we can do about it. But that's the situation we're in. Consider what's happened in El Salvador. The homicide rate in El Salvador has decreased from 103 per 100,000 inhabitants in 2015 to 1 per 100,000 inhabitants this year. Bukele retweeted this and he said, you can just do things. This is one of the things the online right says all the time now. You can just do things. But can we just do things? Because here's the hard truth. It's because El Salvador was such a disaster that Bukele was able to do what he did. It's because you had a hollow state that he was able to rebuild state authority. The problem is not that the American government is incompetent or dysfunctional. It's that it's doing what it intends to do extremely well. and that's fill up the country with dependent non-whites who form a stable political base and prevent white racial consciousness. That is what it does. Purpose of a system is what it does, right? And this is what America does. And so it's not a question of, do we just get the right guy in there and then we can do whatever we want? Now, maybe it will come to that. Maybe somebody has to dare. Maybe somebody has to just cross the Rubicon. Maybe Trump will be forced into doing that. Maybe his successor will be forced into doing that. Maybe somebody else will be forced into doing that. Certainly have nothing to lose, because if we continue on this timeline, there's nothing ahead but ruin, just absolute ruin, all-encompassing ruin. But it's not as simple as the president of El Salvador makes it out to be. It's because this country was so great and because these institutions work so well that reforming them may be impossible. And traditionally, this is how revolution works. It's not that people don't see what reforms are necessary. It's not that people don't anticipate what's going to happen. It's that there's no way to reform a system to take away the privileges from those who are benefiting from the existing system.
Drink a glass of wine or a glass of ice water. Which is better for reversing Alzheimer's and memory?
Without breaking the entire thing. That's the situation that we are in. I mean, I think there's a key here to the whole mystery of the rise and fall of states, that it's because a state becomes successful that you get this degeneracy baked into it that prevents you from doing what needs to be done to save it. That you reach a certain point and you just cannot go farther, because once you get to that point, you have to break the system. It has outlived its usefulness. I would say we are at that point. But do the people recognize that? Do the American people recognize that? It's very easy to say, why can't we just do what El Salvador did? Because it's a lot easier to start from scratch than it is to start from an existing thing. I think President Trump has to go through what he's going through right now. I don't necessarily think he's going to succeed, but I think what's happening now is unfortunate but necessary. The key for us is, what can we capture within this crumbling system that can serve our ends? Because it's not going to fall apart all at once. If it did, I would have no doubt that we're going to win. It's going to be a lot more difficult than that. It's going to be a lot more compromised. It's going to be a lot more complicated. It's going to be a lot more hypocritical and annoying. But we have to have something within this system, or we're just going to get crushed. The problem is not that our system is dysfunctional. The problem is that it is functioning as intended against us. I'll see you next time.